Cool. So next up, we have Emma Simasco, and she is the founder of Stories by Us. Emma is the founder of Stories by Us and an expert in case studies. She's created dozens of case studies and customer stories for B2B tech companies. Clients include Figma, Grammarly, and Salesforce. She's also the creator of the DIY Case Study Kit and the co-host of Freelance Writing Coach podcast. All right, take it away, Emma.
Hi, everybody. I am going to share my screen. Thank you for having me today. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, awesome. So today I'm going to talk about how to use compelling case studies to sell your stuff and how to create them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what case studies are, which you probably already know a little bit, and then how to make ones that are actually really compelling and really persuasive. And we're going to start the talk today with a bidet. So what do you see in this picture? It's a bidet. It's a toilet seat attachment that basically like puts warm water on your butt to clean your butt. And when I first saw one of these, I was like super skeptical. Like I was like, that's weird. Like I'm not used to something like that on my toilet. This is something that's really common in Japan and in Europe as well. But what convinced me on this was that one of my friends bought a new house and she raved about this thing. Like she was like, we bought a new house. It has a bidet. Everyone needs a bidet. Like get yourself one immediately. And after I heard her talk about it, I was basically convinced. And now I'm the proud owner of a bidet toilet seat attachment. Okay, so like, what does this have to do with anything? Like, I mean, right? What does this have to do with case studies? So I tell this story because like, I wasn't sold on this because of an online ad or like getting an email about it, which actually I was like getting ads on Instagram about bidets. But what sold me was my friend's recommendation and her story about how her life was changed from this new toilet seat. And it made me want to change my life too. And that's essentially what a case study or customer story does, but at scale, right? That you're able to share a story of a success with your customers so that they're then compelled to want that same success as well. All right, so let's back up here. And what is a case study? So I define it as a case study is a document or resource that shows the transformation of what happened when someone used your product or service. And the transformation here is key. So it's not just about like saying, oh, like so-and-so was my customer and they used the product and that was great. It's saying like before they used my product, they were suffering or they were in this position, and then something transformed, right? And afterward, they were in a new position. And sometimes people ask me here, like, well, what's the difference between a case study and a testimonial? Like, is it a testimonial and a review? And I think, again, that's the key difference where there's the transformation. So like reviews are great. And so are testimonials. They tend to be shorter and they're usually in first person, someone sharing their direct experience. A case study is a more polished story. Again, and usually has a narrative structure of what that transformation is. And the other thing I say about testimonials is that like, when it comes to selling software, it's different than selling, let's say an iPhone case. Like it's a much more complicated, expensive, and risky decision to buy super expensive software product than it is to buy a $13 iPhone case on Amazon. Like for that, you can just like read a few reviews, like, okay, it's 5 stars, click buy, like not that big of a deal. But if you're paying a company thousands or millions of dollars for a product, which is often the case with software, you want to have a resource that really is showing the customer story much more in depth than a simple review or a testimonial. And then to go along with that, like how do we share this transformation? So a typical case study is broken into 4 sections, let's say. There's sort of a summary, which is like, who is the company? What do they do? What's their size? What industry are they in? And then there's a problem or challenge, right? Like they're going through something that makes them turn to your product or services, right? And then there's a solution, and that's almost like, it's almost like an implementation section, or like, what was it like to work with you? So that maybe is their journey to find you, in the sense of like, okay, we tried out 3 different softwares and we decided this was the best one because, of a few different reasons. It also might say, I found the team incredibly easy to work with. It sort of goes through what the implementation was like. And then there's the results, and that's sort of the after of like, what were the results from working together. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of case studies, what they are, and why they matter. So the plan for today is we're going to be talking about why you need case studies. Then I'll share what makes a case study great, like what makes one go from like kind of blah, which I think there's a lot of them out there. And then I will talk about how to create your own. So let's go. All right, so first of all, I've already talked about like what case studies are and why you need them a little bit, but I just want to highlight like that these things do work. Like, I'm not just making it up that having one work. So 77% of customers in the evaluation stage cited both testimonials and case studies as like the #1 content that influenced their behavior, like over any other type of content that influenced their purchase decision. 90% of buyers who read content about positive customer success found that it influenced their decision on whether to make a purchase. That's a separate study. Those are almost measuring the same thing, but you can see these numbers are quite high, right? And then B2B marketers believe customer testimonials and case studies are the most effective types of content that they have at their disposal. So like we have, as content marketers, we can create all kinds of resources, right? Blog articles, ebooks, guides, calculators, quizzes, tools, everything. And B2B marketers think that these are some of the most powerful assets. So it really matters that we get them right. Okay, and so why do B2B SaaS companies in particular need case studies? I got into this a little bit when I was talking about like, this is an expensive and risky purchase potentially, as opposed to buying that iPhone case. But also when people are assessing B2B SaaS tools, they're often looking at a few different options, right? Like, and they might be looking at a number of factors. They want the tool to be easy to use. They want it to be simple to implement. They need it to have the right features. They need it to integrate with what they already have. They want it to fit their budget. And then on the larger scale, they want it to solve a pain point or challenge they're having, right? Like something is either broken or not efficient in their business, and they're looking for a tool that can really solve that problem. And then when it comes to choosing software, because it can be a risky decision and it affects lots of people within an organization, no one wants to be a guinea pig, right? Like this is not something where you're like, well, that iPhone case has no reviews. I'm just going to buy it and try it out. Like, oh, well, this purchase may affect a gigantic team or the organization as a whole. It might not if you're selling sort of like to an individual entrepreneurs, but even for them, like, we're talking about their business and how they're generating revenue for themselves. So like this can be a pretty weighty decision. And so ultimately, like case studies differentiate you from your competitors by showing how you function in the real world. So it's not just sort of the words on your website, the list of features, the promise that your API is as awesome as you say it is. It's a real life example. Like it's basically proof that you do what you say you do. And I've had many clients tell me that they were, before they had case studies, when they had a prospect that was interested, they would just connect an existing customer with the prospect on a phone call, right? And those prospects were happy to do that, but that's not a scalable solution, right? Like as your software platform grows, you can't just continually rely on the same set of customers to talk to hopefully the hundreds or thousands of customers that are coming in your door every month or every year. So case studies are a scalable way to share those stories, right? All right, so I want to take a moment to highlight a case study that's done wonders for a sales team. So this is the sort of beginning. I can't really like fit the whole case study in a slide, but this is the beginning of a case study I helped create for Orem. Orem is a tool for sales development representatives. And this case study puts the results front and center, like it highlights the win directly in the headline, right? Like who wouldn't want a 400% boost in call productivity for a sales team that's doing cold calling, right? Like that's that's gigantic. And then I also just wanted to note, like, it has a friendly picture of the existing customer and a larger quote, making the case study relatable to a prospect. So like, if they can't get on a Zoom call with someone, you still want to see their smiling face to tell this story, right? And it's better that the story comes from them rather than you as a brand, right? Here's another example. And I love this example because it positions the customer as the hero of the case study. At the end of the day, there's a human being who's going to benefit from your product, right? So like I talked earlier that it's maybe a big team that's going to be using it, but it's an individual decision maker who's going to have wins based on using this tool. So like it's going to either make them look good at work, help them get promoted, make more money for their business or the business as a whole, drive important KPIs. So it's although you're selling to businesses, there are decision makers and there are people who are going to implement your tool and what you offer. So I think highlighting who the hero is of the story and allowing someone to see what it might be like to be in their shoes is a great way to appeal to them in a case study. All right, cool. So now that we all agree that case studies are important, and I've shared a few examples of case studies that are done well, like what are some other factors that make them great? Like what's the difference between a bland testimonial that makes someone shrug and they're like, okay, and a really compelling case study that makes someone say yes? So these are my 4 keys to a great case study here. So the first key is to tell a story. And surprisingly, most case studies don't tell a great story. They sort of just like blandly share some details about what happened and maybe some details about the results, but they're not really showing a nice before, during, and after narrative. And a real case study really does this. So the way that I break it down is, and I did this a little earlier with sort of the challenge solution results, but when you think about it in story form, it's basically like the before is what was the customer struggling with before they were working with you? During, what was it like to work with you? What did you do for them? And then after, what were the results of working together? So like if we go back to my silly example of the bidet, it's like before having the bidet, someone has a dirty butt, okay? During the bidet, they're getting their butt cleaned with warm water and it feels good. And then after, they have a squeaky clean behind, no skid marks on their underwear, and they go out into the world feeling great. Yeah, so that telling a story like that, I mean, I'm obviously telling a facetious story about the bidet, but I think the same can be applied to software. So like, where was someone before they had your tool? What were they struggling with? Why were those challenges so hard? And then during, like, what was the implementation like? Was the process seamless? And then finally, the results. All right, so my second key tip here is to give buyers a mirror. I talked a little bit about this with just saying like it is an individual decision maker, but I always say that the reason case studies work is because they essentially give your buyer a mirror to look at their future self. So they have an opportunity to see what's possible for them after working with you. And that's why I not only recommend highlighting individuals and saying like, yeah, so-and-so benefited, but making sure to use their photos and direct quotes as well. This makes it more real for people. Like even if they are not the ultimate decision maker, even if you don't have a giant picture like in that other case study I showed, it makes it more grounded in reality as opposed to just vague mentions about a team or company, which I see a lot. Just some kind of like, you know, a random finance company used us and there's no real detail around it. And that makes it either like hard to believe or it just isn't very compelling. All right, so the third tip here is to share the results. This part is, it's often the business results that are gonna help a decision maker get internal buy-in to say yes to your tool. And also have them convinced that they are going to get results beyond like, oh, it was just easy to use, or like, we like how it looked, or the user experience was nice, which those things are great and they're super important, but they're kind of like wiggly things, right? They're hard for someone to go to a boss and be like, hey, this is really going to help us. So it's really important to highlight the value that's provided to the business, and using quick numbers and charts that someone can scan makes it easy for them to digest that information. I pulled out these examples here because they're kind of these nice little call out boxes that show what someone is gaining from working with you, even if they don't read the case study, right? Like they can see these results. They're right there. They're highlighted. Someone can see them and understand them and digest them easily. So I get this question a lot, which is like, what if you don't have results? And I put results in quotes because I sometimes hear this question, especially if the product is sort of far from, let's say, like bottom line revenue or something, to which I say, like, you can be a little bit creative in what results means, quantitative results, I mean. So for example, some things that I'm often helping people highlight is like how much time was saved for people. That isn't sort of like dollars gained, but how much time was saved by using the tool. How many assets were created. So for example, like if you're selling proposal software, how many new proposals were created by your customer? Like that's a solid number that someone can say like, oh my gosh, that is an insane increase in productivity or efficiency. And I think that you can work with your clients to find some creative ways to share results. And all that said, I think that if you sort of can't find these quantitative results, there are tons of qualitative things to say that are potentially really compelling as well. That's sort of easy to work with, easy integrations, a joy to use, and all of these other things. Finally, the final key here is to make it easy to read. So we all know as marketers that people skim. We do it ourselves, right? And you basically want someone to be able to understand what the case study is saying, even if they don't read it. And I know that sort of flies in the face of like, you go through all this work to create something, and then you also must assume that people are going to scan this. They're not even going to read it, but you still want to get your message across, right? So there are a few tactics for doing this. Like I really liked how Grammarly did this, where they highlighted a part of the quote that they really wanted people to focus in on. So even though that's a really short quote, even if someone doesn't read the whole quote, if they read that first clause, it's not even a full sentence, they're getting some understanding of the value. And then they highlighted some results here that are in these little colorful call out boxes. So again, someone can have their eye drawn to these things. Okay, so now that we've gone over why case studies matter, as well as the 4 keys to make one that's actually great, how do we actually go about creating them? So my first recommendation is to go in with a plan. I see a lot of teams being like, I know we need case studies, but like just go off and make some, right? Like it's not very strategic. And so I always recommend that people take a minute and use case studies really strategically. So first, you want to define your why. Like, why are you creating a case study? It's not enough to be like, well, everyone else is doing it, seems like something we should do, right? Like there are maybe customers that you're having trouble reaching. Sales teams often want case studies and they're asking for them, but figure out why you actually want them, and what purpose they're going to serve for the business, for both the sales and marketing team. And then how are you going to do it? So are you going to hire an external party to interview and create the case studies? Are you going to do them in-house? Are you going to create a spreadsheet of all your customers? How are you going to do outreach? How are you going to tap people? Are you going to reward people for spending time with you on the phone? Think through the how. And by the way, all of this should be documented also before going into it. And then finally, like you need to get your team on board with this. So you may need to tap sales teams, customer success, to say like, what customers have you talked to that have had compelling things to say? If you're working with someone like Adrian, that's really natural to say like, Adrian, who did you talk to? That would make a really good case study, right? Because doing that kind of customer research that Adrian does is different from doing a case study in the sense that you're really looking for the success story with a case study, right? But tapping into all of those resources and getting the whole team on board to making it happen is really important. And then the next thing here is to conduct a killer customer interview. So the reason that I highlight this as like the most important part or one of the most important parts of how to create a good case study is because I see so many really poorly done interviews. So clients help me or clients hire me occasionally to do the interview myself, or sometimes they send me a transcript of and recording of an interview they've already conducted. And a lot of times those transcripts are missing like a lot of pertinent information. And this also really matters because you only get that client's attention for 30 to 45 minutes. You don't want to have to do the call over again. You really want to make as much of this interview as you possibly can. So I found that hiring a third party is helpful because customers tend to be more open. So even if they have really positive things to say, they tend to be more open with a third party and have that sort of no holds barred honesty. A few tips for the interview here, and I know I'm coming up on time. I'm almost done. I promise I have like 2 more minutes. So set the context with the customer, remind the customer what they're participating in, give a quick overview of what the process will be. Shut up. This is like one of the, Adrian alluded to this too, like be comfortable with the uncomfortable silences. One of the biggest mistakes I see is that the interviewee dominates the conversation. And they don't let any awkward pause happen to let somebody explain themselves or to get really good information. And then finally, I always ask for examples. So somebody might say like, oh, this tool really enhanced my personal productivity. And I might be like, can you give me an example of when that happened? And then you're able to draw out a really interesting and compelling story. All right, last slide here. So finally, case studies are a bottom of the funnel asset, and that means that they are often used when someone has kind of assessed their tools and they're trying to make a decision if your tool is the right one. Like they're well past the awareness stage, right? Like they're trying to figure out if your tool is right for them. And so you need to really strategically bake case studies into the overall sales and marketing funnel and into the journey. So the way that I've seen them used is they can be used by sales teams, for outreach and in pitch decks and even in customer demos. They can be used when onboarding new customers. So the customer's already made the decision to go with you, but you want to make them feel extra good that they've made a good decision. They can be on the homepage. Tons of companies do that. They can be in email sequences and many more. You can be really creative with where they go. Okay. And then finally, because I think the case study interview is so important, I have case study interview questions that I give away for free just as a PDF. So if anyone is interested in accessing my case study questions as a resource, please send me an email. That's my email address right there. And I'd be happy to send those over. All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
That was awesome. One of the questions I actually wrote down, you covered on the last slide, which is like, what are the creative ways to squeeze more out of case studies? So I'm really glad you covered that.
Yeah, and I've seen clients do really creative and interesting things with that. So like those are just some of the ideas, but one thing that I've seen people do too, and this would be more for like individual entrepreneurs, but people put them into their contract. So there's like a page in their contract where they have an actual case study. I mean, there's tons of ways they can be used. I think what's important is to look at the full picture and say like, when are we going to hit these customers with the case study? And something else that I didn't highlight is that, and this again goes along with some of the buyer persona things that Adrian was talking about, is figuring out like who each of the case studies is for. Like you can do them sort of based on what features someone is taking advantage of, what kind of decision maker they are, what kind of buyer persona they are, and then try and like personalize what somebody's getting. So that it's not just sort of a general case study from a company that is not like them at all, but really like matches pain points. I always recommend doing it that way. Like, you have maybe 4 main pain points that people come to you with. So create at minimum 4 case studies that address those pain points. And I honestly think the more you have to draw from, the better.
How do you choose which companies or which customers you reach out to for case studies? And even within that, like who at the company you reach out to for quotes and interviews?
Yeah, good question. So, usually when I work with companies, they tend to have kind of a short list of, I might call them like brand advocates or like super fans. I think most software companies have like a small community of customers that they're often the customers that are trying out new features, or when I work with early stage startups, they often have like a really close relationship because they're kind of working together to make the tool work because they're sort of a beta customer. So usually they have an idea. But I also have, if you sort of have no idea, then the best place to tap is customer success, because they are often talking with the customers. They're working hand in hand with them. They often have a really good idea. I've also seen companies do calls for case studies, like doing an email blast and saying like, hey, we're looking for customer success stories. Like, anyone like to share theirs? And maybe there's a little reward or incentive, like anyone who does it gets a $50 gift card or something like that, or a free month of service, or whatever it is. And then in terms of who does it. So the way that I've seen most successful is usually there's someone internally, maybe a content marketer or a customer success person or somebody like Adrienne who's brought on, who will do sort of a preliminary round of talking with people, and like just finding out like, and that conversation shouldn't be about getting the success. It's just like understanding their experience, right? And then from that, they can usually come up with a short list of like, these are the ones who would be the absolute best for it.
I have a question that I think might be just a rephrasing of the quality versus quantity question in content marketing, but
yeah,
I want to do way more case studies with our agency. I don't know how many. So the question is really, how many case studies is too many, or is it just like as many as possible?
Because, well, can I ask, like, how many do you have and why do you feel you need more? Or do you have zero?
We have like 3, but I've looked in the content marketing space and I've noticed other agencies that we compete with, that we come up on sales calls and we hear their names, they don't have anything public. So it's like, I feel like this could be a unique differentiator when somebody comes to our site and they're like, they have so fucking many case studies that it's like Client Boost is the agency I look at. And Jonathan Dane's a friend. He runs a PPC agency, and on their homepage, they have this section right below the fold that says, we have more case studies than the other agencies have clients. And they've got like 620 case studies.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, that's clearly the far end of the spectrum, but like, yeah, I guess my question is like, how much do you want? Like, how many case studies is too much?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on your business and like what, like, so for an agency, I think it makes sense to have a lot, because I think that, I mean, no offense to agencies, but many people have been burned by agencies, right? Like that is a riskier decision than buying like FreshBooks accounting for $50 a month and being like, I'm going to move to QuickBooks, right? Like, you need to onboard an agency to understand your business intimately. You're relying on them to drive like really serious results for your business. And I think that's a reason to have more. But I also think that your prospects are maybe doing more research, and it's a good way in your position to catch them when they are sort of in the research phase, right? Like it's an argument for having them out there public. Like your competitors might have case studies, but they might not be sharing them until someone is closer to making a decision. So, and then in terms of like how many, I think it's hard for me to answer for you, but like, I feel like if you had, 9 to 12, that would be a good amount to have sort of the diversity in industries that you work with size of the company. And I think you sort of have to figure out how to stratify it, right? Like maybe how many different types of clients do you have? Like you divide that by industry, and then you divide that by pain point. So let's just say like you have 2 major pain points and you work with tech companies like SaaS and fintech or something like that. And you're like, okay, well, I want a fintech case studies for these 2 pain points, and I want SaaS case studies for the 2 pain points as well. So like, that's a way to think about it. I mean, you have to think a little bit strategically about what will work for you. And I don't know your business well enough to make the recommendation, but those are some thoughts on it.
No, that's super helpful. I like how you map it out by pain point and kind of industry segment. And I think we could do that pretty easily. So
yeah, because I think the challenges is really key. So like if someone sees that they have the same challenges as someone else, and then those challenges were overcome, they're like, okay, well, they can solve this problem for me.
Right. I
And
could
I've
see it being
even,
much different for like a startup who's like, we don't have any blog and we don't have any content marketing. And like we brought it from, scratch to something versus like, oh, we worked with SAP and like, like improve their conversions from content by 20%. Like that's a whole different use case, both impressive
exactly.
in their own right, but speaks to a different audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
All right, all right. So I don't have any big announcements for the end here. I did drop a survey if anyone wants to take that. We're also going to send that out via email. The next event we're going to throw is on May 18th, so in 2 months. And I don't think we have the full lineup yet, but I can tell you that David Cadavy, who is a podcast guest, is going to be back on for a fireside chat with me. I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to talk about the creative producers toolkit. So he'll talk about the behind the scenes, I guess, of like how creatives can work better. Outside of that, yeah. So Carissa dropped the survey in the chat and we'll send it out on May 18th. So be on the lookout. Thank you.